Welcome to Deed and Truth, a podcast exploring loving God and loving our neighbors, not just in words, but also in actions, and with the Bible as the source and standard of truth. I'm Tommy Morris, and in the studio with me today, I have Mr. Shawn Shomer.
Hello.
What's up, Shawn?
Happy to be here.
And Mr. Scott Vitro.
Hey. Glad to be here.
Yeah.
Let's do this.
You're on the hot seat today, man.
I know. I'm a little bit nervous, but let's do it.
Yeah. So you interviewed us on Zambia, and now it is our turn to interview you on something that you have experience with and we don't, and that is fostering.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when you guys were going on the Zambia trip, and my wife kept asking me if I wanted to go. And I mean, I have some health issues anyway. I'm diabetic and have kidney stones. And I was like, that may not be the best idea in the world to go internationally travel for 5 days. But, at a certain point, I told my wife, and it's nothing against going to Zambia, but everybody has different reasons for things. And I told her, I was like, my Zambia is here because maybe a little bit different situation, but there's just in our community an overwhelming, surprising amount of kids that are not just in foster care, but just the reasons why they get into care. And it's it's very similar to street kids in Africa, right? Something happens with the parents. Occasionally it's because the parents have passed away, but more than likely it's either abuse or drugs or some combination of all of the above, right? And these kids come into care and have a lot of trauma and things like that. So yeah, there's a lot of similarities in the way, missions work. And I feel like for the past few years, my wife and I's, mission field has been here in our area and try to take in some kids and give them stability and fight the system and the world. And it's been a wild ride.
So we're going to talk about some of that today. I think it is interesting to do this one after we talked about Zambia and the fact that over there, the big ministry is really for outreach for kids.
Yeah.
Kids who are hurting, who have been abused, who maybe have had parents die or family members die. And Shawn, just you. I mean, when we were over there and you starting to feel like maybe some element of helping in a type of role with foster care here back in the States was something that maybe God was leading you to. Maybe doing an Isaiah house or something. But you had started to really lean in on praying about your role as far as working with kids here too.
Yeah, I'd heard about the Isaiah 117 house through, you and Shara. And so I emailed the team. They sent me the email back. I still got it in my inbox. I haven't started the process yet. But yeah, I mean, these are my people. So I feel you.
Yeah, and that's what I think is cool is like kind of this little connection, right, of like, in different ways, God using us to work with kids. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens with you, Shawn. But man, you, Scott, you've been in the trenches for how long now?
Over 2 years now. Yeah. I mean, we technically did it in California too, but that was for some kinship care, for a little bit. So yeah, I mean, honestly, it doesn't, sound like a lot of time, but the past few years have been very busy, a lot of whiplash, a lot of ups and downs. And, I mean, I kind of want to do no whole bars on this, just because, I want to speak truthfully about it. But
so disclaimer, disclaimer, Scott's experience might not be everyone's, but he's going to be willing to share from the good and the bad. And that way everybody just kind of understands what it really entails. I mean, no different than like in Zambia. It's not always good. I mean, just a few months after we left, there was a girl who ran away, went back to the streets. There was another one who got killed, got hit by a bus. Like, there are really hard parts when you do ministries like this. There are things that really test you, test your faith, test your strength. There are some ugly sides to things like this. And so, yeah, you're going to be somewhat candid, right?
Sure.
To a degree. And we're just going to have an honest conversation about it. So, Shawn, you got any start off questions for Scott here?
I guess I never asked, but why do you guys foster?
Well, we've talked about like adopting for a long time, and our immediate family is done with having kids. So, I was telling my wife, I was like, hey, if we want more kids, like maybe we can look into adoption, like down the road. But when we lived in California, probably 5 or 6 years ago now, two of my wife's, I guess, cousins, they're both teenagers. They were removed from their home. So, fatherless home, mom had, drug addiction, stuff like that. So they were removed, and they were young teenagers, and, we had the opportunity for them to come to our home. They were with us for 3 or 4 months, and I mean, it was really neat. I mean, we didn't have our house set up for them. Like back then we had like a little 3-bedroom, probably 1,200 square foot house, and throwing 2 teenagers in there was a little challenging. So that was kind of our first introduction into it, but it was really neat to not only just to, get to know them, but to kind of see them start to change a little bit, being in a stable, home. And so they ended up going with another family member more long term, and they've been there with another set of cousins ever since. And so they've come a long way. The boy, he ended up going to college and is doing good things. He got a scholarship and stuff. He's very athletic. Got a wrestling scholarship, and the girl's doing okay too. She's an adult now. But yeah, I mean, it was just, it kind of opened up the door to this world of foster care anyway. So it's a little bit different whenever you're related and you take in a kid, because there's not as much paperwork and, hoops to jump through, and, inspections and licenses and stuff like that. So yeah, that's really where it started. And then, once we moved out here, we were really praying about, our ministry. And so we really started researching into, just the need for foster care in our area. And
so that was kind of right away when you moved? Like you kind of already knew moving that.
Yeah. So after the cousins had left, to their permanent home, that's kind of what, planted the seed. We really started researching and praying about it. And, it's just funny because, you guys know me and my testimony and things like that. We never really, like my wife never wanted kids. I was scared to death to be a dad, stuff like that. God blessed us with 3, biological kids. So, there's been growth in that, but we wanted to extend it beyond that, just because it's like, you've blessed us so much with not just our marriage, but our own kids and family. And we're not perfect by any means, but we just said, hey, like let's just give this a shot, because there's so many kids who just need some stability, some love, even things you guys talked about in Zambia, just to be played with or to feel safe, even just to have a father figure in the home, something that most of these kids have never had, where we can step in and do that. So that desire really grew in our hearts. And once we came out here, we started taking classes, and during the middle of a pandemic, of course, best time to start anything. And we got licensed and started. So that's kind of why. A lot of God tugging at our hearts and, basically saying, hey, this is your ministry for a time.
Okay.
So
right on.
So what, for those who maybe don't know, like what does that process look like when you go to apply to be foster parents?
So good question. So every state is a little bit different on their requirements. So basically out here, we filled out, there's a lot of paperwork involved. You fill out this big initial application, and then you get signed up for classes that are usually about 8 weeks. We did them on Zoom, during the pandemic stuff. And then after that, there's a lot of background checks, fingerprinting, several inspections of your home, and you have to baby proof it and make sure you got, fire extinguisher, medical kit, stuff like that. They just want to see that, hey, there's a safe environment, for the kid. And then you wait for your license and you get it. And then after that, at least here, it was kind of a nice thing. They don't just like kind of leave you to your devices. They actually hook you up with a mentor for your first 6 months. Somebody been doing it a long time, where you can ask questions and figure out how to handle different situations, because it is not like normal parenting. And you really get into the whole world of trauma and what that does to your brain, and especially when you're a young kid and stuff like that. And it affects everything. The way we speak to them, discipline's different. Everything's pretty much different. But what you're trying to do is give them what they never got, even if they're older kids, and it's like, well, hey, if this kid was never, held or rocked or interacted with, they still need that, like they kind of need that void filled, just to kind of make them feel safe, because that's kind of the progression of like, a baby, like, you meet their needs when they're super little, and then they grow up, they feel safe in their world, and they go out and explore. Whenever those needs aren't met, though, you have all types of trauma and you react different ways to different things. And so it's really kind of a focus on trying to heal that trauma.
Yeah, it's interesting because, it can be things that maybe in a regular home we take for granted and don't think about the impact of that. And it's like playing catch up.
Yeah.
You just kind of, it can be easy to assume that an older kid doesn't need those things. But, there's a lot that's been missing for those years that impacts their cognitive abilities, security, emotional stability, things like that. So, that's interesting.
Yeah. And one thing I'd like to point out too, speaking of that is like, and even with the older kids. So if that trauma is never addressed, it's usually cyclical, right? So a lot of foster kids, their parents were also in the foster care system, sort of thing. So if it doesn't get fixed, it can get out of hand for generations into adulthood. And that affects everybody. That affects society. That affects, how many homeless people there are. And and the stats are crazy about, foster kids who age out and things like that, just their rate of homelessness, their rate of, jail time, teen pregnancies, everything up and down the board. If they age out without ever getting like their needs met, it's usually not good whenever they, become adults too. Even though there's a lot of resources out there for them and free college and things like that. But yeah.
So these kids, they come from broken environments, broken homes, and then they come into a foster home. And I've talked to y'all about like the removal process and all that. Maybe you could break down like from broken home to foster home, what that looks like, just to kind of just as the timeline goes.
Well, the interesting thing is, I won't get into like the number of kids, but there's been a lot, and we've had everybody from babies to, older teenagers in our home and everything in between. So, there are common threads, but it really depends, how old they are when they get removed too. Right. So what's crazy is that, you start really educating yourself on trauma. You don't think about like a baby or an infant, having a lot of trauma. It's just like, well, they were removed from their home, but, still neurologically, they are either, coming off drugs, have brain damage, or their needs were, never met even as babies. So, they, just because they can't express trauma, through like words, because they obviously can't speak yet, their brains are still impacted by trauma, even as little babies. So, it really depends. I've shared some of the stories with you guys, but you want to talk about, different types of people groups and, different, backgrounds and neighborhoods. Like it really doesn't matter. Like the Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, like it does not matter. We see the common things through all of them. It's either severe abuse, alcoholism, drugs, or some combination of that. So, we've seen every people group, everybody, it's even across the board. There is no one more than the other. It's all the same. So whenever they get removed, and this is what's wild. So, even if like, let's say the home wasn't that bad, so to speak, like just them getting removed from their home, even if they were never, severely abused or anything like that, is super traumatic, because you have to think like, obviously depending on the age of the kid, but they're being removed from the only safety that they know. Even if it's bad safety, they still have, attachment to the person who's abusing them.
Yeah, that's they're normal.
Yeah, that's all that they know, and they're still attached to them. But you're also removing them from aunts, uncles, cousins, their friends in their neighborhood. You're removing them from coaches, teachers. If they go to church, you're removing them from everything that they know. So even if they didn't have trauma before, just the act of removing them from a home is going to induce trauma. And so then you take that on top of, years of physical, mental, emotional abuse, addiction, seeing parents, beat each other up, whatever it is. So that's kind of how that transition works. Like they learn fight or flight really quick. And so, and that comes out in very different ways. Like some kids, it's really sad because you think they're okay, but they internalize, right? So you'll maybe get a kid who, you know, is a very good sleeper. And it's like, oh, hey, this is awesome. You know, like they're not fussing, they sleep really well, but it's because they've been isolated or left alone. They don't know that it's okay to, like, you know, cry out for somebody because they've, you know, probably tried to cry out before and nobody ever came to meet them. So they're just quiet. Or, you know, they're not very responsive, or sometimes you even see it in like pain tolerance, like they're just like numb, like they'll, you know, bust their head or fall down and it's just like nothing, you know. And then you have the other side of it where, you know, whenever they go into fight or flight, I mean, they just fly off the handle. It's like they're not even there. You know, whether it's, you know, screaming, yelling, crying, you know, hitting, you know, we've had kids try to hit us with baseball bats before. He was like 4, but, you know, just like, I mean, fly off the handle. Or you have this other thing called RADS. It's a reactive attachment disorder. And it's really wild to see because I've seen it with, like, you know, we obviously know other foster families and we hang out with their kids. And you'll have like some little kid who you've never met before just run up and like hold your hand and call you daddy. And it's like, whoa, like what is, like, I don't even know you at all, but they overly attach to anybody, to strangers, to anybody. And so there's kind of like that spectrum of it too. And so by the time they get to your home, you know, all they know is fight or flight. But, you know, there's like the honeymoon phase where, you know, they come in and, you know, they're still trying to figure out if they can trust you, their environment, stuff like that. So, you know, they're usually pretty well behaved, you know, things like that, pretty compliant. But once they get comfortable, all their trauma starts coming out, and it's a beast to handle. So that's kind of how that transition works. But the thing is like, you know, we're kind of assuming that, you know, they're taken out of a home and brought straight to your house. Well, you know, coming to your house may be their 5th or 6th or 20th home, you know, that they've been bounced around, or maybe they've gone back to mom or dad before, then been removed again, and things like that. Or, you know, a lot of times what happens is if there's not enough homes open, because some of these kids, they need like special homes that are, you know, there's different like levels of being licensed. You know, you can be like a therapy home, and that's for kids who, you know, with extreme behaviors, or a medical home, you know, because a lot of these kids come in with all types of medical issues. And things like that. But a lot of times what will happen is, you know, if there's not space for them, you know, they're basically, you know, they like to call it different things so it doesn't sound like the office. But, you know, a lot of times they're sleeping at the office with social workers, or in a government building where, you know, they just get, you know, hey, here's some microwavable burritos and here's your room. And, you know, you can't go outside during the day unless you're supervised, you know, sort of thing. Almost, you know, like being like a little baby prison, you know. And then they come to your home, you know, so don't ever just assume this is like their first trip. But even if it was, they would be very traumatized. But a lot of times this is like the, you know, however many times that they've changed home, you know, this is another new environment, more people that they either, you know, can't trust or have a hard time trusting. And then you have to kind of shield them from all of that and show them, you know, like, hey, like, you're safe here, your needs are going to be met, and we're going to help you through your trauma.
Yeah. So you just touched on something, you having to, you know, shield those kids and be what they need you to be. And coming from, you know, a 4-year-old trying to hit you with a baseball bat, to a teenager, to, you know, whether this is their 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 20th home, sleeping in a government building. I mean, the range of trauma and stuff that these kids, you know, bring along with them, being what they need you to be. How do you do that as a foster dad, as a foster family? You know, you and your wife, you have 3 biological kids, bringing these kids into your home. How do you have to adjust? What does life look like for y'all?
Man, I mean, that's a great question. So, you know, first off, we don't always do it well. We've made a lot of mistakes. You know, there have been times where, well, I mean, you know, I think God is sovereign and all that. I think every kid that's been in our home has been there for a reason, even if it was for a weekend or a day. But, you know, doing it takes a lot of practicing and failing, I guess, because we have definitely not done it perfect. But I mean, you know, first of all, and I think my wife shares this sentiment too. Like, I honestly don't understand how people do foster care who are not believers. I just, like, I could not imagine trying to do this completely on my own. So, I mean, one of the only reasons is God. But, practically speaking, like that's a, hey, are we being super diligent and prayerful about this and saying, hey, Lord, like we feel like you've called us to this and I am tired. I don't have the, energy or strength or the education, the knowledge of what this kid needs to help us through this. I mean, that's always the starting point. My wife and I did take a course, though, they offered. It's called TBRI, and it's trust-based relational intervention. And it really, honestly, I was telling her, I was like, I wish every parent would take one of these courses, because it really helped me understand my trauma, my wife's trauma, kind of how we grew up and different things that have never been addressed, because it's all about like addressing trauma and how to parent, but not from like a traditional way, right? Like, I grew up, my mom was very traditional, with, discipline and spankings and things like that. And I've done that with my own kids, and, it's been effective, in certain ways, but it's really more about, trying to build a relationship with a kid and trying to understand that, hey, whenever they're, flying off the handle or they have this behavior, it's not personal. Because I think a lot of times when our kids act up, like we take it so personal, like, well, you're a reflection of me, or you're doing this on purpose, without understanding that, hey, this kid has a whole Pandora's box of, just trash and junk that they've had to go through in their little lives, and now it's coming out. And so just kind of like trying to change your mindset about why these kids are behaving this way, I think is probably the first step in being able to handle it, even somewhat, because, instead of spanking someone or putting them in a timeout or, doing these different things, like you have to basically teach them how to regulate themselves, and I mean, it's hard enough for us to regulate ourselves, right? Like quote unquote normal, people, whatever, grew up in an okay home, but a lot of it has to do with like letting them work through their emotions, and you have to wait until they go, there's a whole biological or neurological, process that they kind of walk you through about what's actually happening in your brain whenever you're trauma triggered, right? And, whenever you're in your fit or whatever, like you're just not there. Like it's not reaching like the reason part of your brain. It's basically like whenever your trauma's coming out, only like the base part of your brain, your instincts, right? Your fight or flight instincts. And, you really can't talk to a person or a kid. It's kind of like whenever you're having an argument with an adult, and, it just seems like you're talking to a brick wall, because they're not there to reason with you or listen or anything. And it's the exact same thing. They're so emotionally caught up in like what they believe or think that no amount of reason or anything is going to help at the moment. So one of the biggest things is trying to like learn how to get one-on-one with them, to get on their level, waiting for them to calm down. Cause, a lot of times some kids, maybe they just, need something to eat or drink, or maybe they just need like a hand on their shoulder. Sometimes like I'm a touch person, like that's like my love language. And, for some kids that helps calm them down, things like that. And also giving them a little bit of freedom, whenever they at least, kind of first come into your home. Like I can't tell you how many kids, we've taken in. And, one of the first things, like, my wife and I, we try to eat pretty healthy and, don't allow a lot of junk in the house. But, whenever, especially like an older kid, like let's say 5 and above or something, I'll just ask them like, what do you like to eat? And I'll take them to the store like the very first night. And if they want, Reese's Pieces and a whole bunch of junk food, then what? Like that person's been through a lot of stuff, right? And so the least I can do for them is to try to make them feel comfortable that first night. And especially, like whenever we've had girls come in, with absolutely nothing. Because some of these kids, I mean, they'll either have like a trash bag or they'll have nothing because maybe they had to leave in a hurry, so they don't even have, toothbrushes or combs or brushes or anything like that. So just doing just something small just to help, like, hey, I'm going to meet that need right now. Even though, like, whenever they first come into your home, they're on another planet already because they don't know you. They're kind of scared, so they're not exactly there to tell you their life story the first night, right? And a lot of foster kids later on will tell you, like, I don't even remember the first couple of days I was in this home or whatever because they were so just scared or whatever. Mm-hmm. So just trying to like meet that need, and then just trying to talk to them to see what they like to do. Like, hey, like we bought like a punching bag, and sometimes I'll tell these kids, I'll be like, look, if you're mad, go out here. And that's what you hit. You don't hit me. You don't hit us. You don't hit the walls. Go out here and hit this. Go outside and ride a bike.
Very good investment.
Yeah. I mean, it works for me too. I'm like, all right.
I was going to say that.
I need to get some frustration out.
I think we've all hit that thing.
But yeah, so you're kind of asking like how or like what do we do? And really it's just trying to change your mindset of like, okay, this person isn't doing this on purpose or just to spite me. This is, what happens when a kid with trauma comes in your home and a cat's out of the bag, right. Because all that stuff has to be released, somewhere. And once they start feeling comfortable, all of it comes out. And unfortunately, that's when we have to step in and try to deal with it, which can be, very tiresome, and it's work. But I mean, it's going to be a lot of work to try to help somebody to overcome those things.
Yeah. I mean, I guess what I'm kind of hearing, what you're saying is there's no script. There's no A, B, C. This is how you deal with foster kids. Every kid has their own junk drawer full of stuff.
Yeah.
And you just have to kind of wing it, I guess, as you go. I mean, you can equip yourself with tools, but there's no set right way to mentor to these kids or
it's like case by case and kind of how the specifics of how
everybody's different. Yeah. They've all got their own set of trauma and how they're going to deal with it.
Yeah. And like you said, there's definitely tools, but yeah, I mean, it's just like all of us are individuals, they are too, and they all have different things. I mean, sometimes I'll just, just to get kids, kind of interacting, like, I'll start off with like, hey, like high five, and like, so sometimes kids are comfortable with that. Sometimes they're not at all. Sometimes you don't know, like, hey, if I try to, like do a high five, or if I try to hug this kid or something, are they just going to start swinging, sort of thing, and so, you definitely get a feel for it. Cause sometimes I've just been like, hey man, like, can I give you a hug? And, give a teenager a hug and, you're like, all right, cool. Like we're good, or just, fist bump, high five, whatever, and things like that. But it's so crazy. Cause like, like I said, whenever they come in and they don't have anything, it's been amazing to me, like what happens whenever you take them to a store and you let them choose. And I'm talking like even like older teenagers that we've had come in that you've met before, just taking them to say like, hey, like, what kind of clothes do you like or whatever. And they're like, I've never been able to choose my own clothes or even with food, like, oh, I've never been able to, pick a candy before or, pick out my own socks or anything like that. And you're like, you're shocked, you're like, what? Like you're 16 years old. Like nobody's ever given you a choice. Yeah. And so part of it's like empowering them too, to say like, hey, like this is normal. Like you have a voice and it matters. Because a lot of times these kids just want to be heard and seen, just like any of us, because they've been so isolated from what's normal, in society.
I remember I think we went to Publix with Robert just to pick out like cereal in the morning. It was like, hey man, what do you want? Like crickets. Like, what do you mean? What do I want?
Yeah.
It's like, I've never had a choice. Like my grandma has, Frosted Wheats on top of her fridge. So that's what I eat, cause he had a relationship with his grandma, but just him getting to pick out his own cereal was a blessing to him. Like that was huge. You could tell by the look on his face that was awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. And that happens every day.
That's cool, man. So we're going to get a little personal here.
Yeah. All right. Let's do it.
So we'll start with the rough and then we'll finish with the good. Right. So in all of this, man, what has been one of, or some of the hardest moments you guys have faced or kind of been through that have really challenged you? Or even, look, I imagine most people who do this probably have moments of like, I'm done.
Yeah.
So what have those moments looked like for you and Shara?
Man, so it's been a lot of things. What you have to keep in mind is that you're not just taking this kid into your home. Now you're dealing with several people from the state. The caseworkers, the gals, all the coordination workers, doctors' visits, medical stuff. So you have this challenge where the state is all up in your business and in your life and can basically do what they want at any time, right? So one of the hardest things has been not only trying to, to take care of that in the background, but, some of the things that happen sometimes that, that are just out of your control is probably whenever they make decisions about the kids, future without considering the foster family at all. Because, like you said, it's not just me and my wife, our 3 kids, develop relationships with these kids too. And so some of the hardest things have been whenever they have to leave, whether it was, us making that call, because I've made that call before, or whenever they just do it anyway because some circumstance. I won't get into like different, details or scenarios, but, you can get a phone call just saying that like, hey, we're taking the kid to, long lost aunt or uncle that we just found. And, you've got 3 hours to get them ready or whatever. And, kids don't really have a chance to say goodbye, and you're dealing with emotions and things like that. So yeah, I think saying goodbye is probably one of the hardest things.
Well, I think real quick, one of the hard parts about what you just mentioned is, well, similar to Zambia, they say, we want to try to reconcile the kid with family. And so here that will kind of become a priority, even if it really isn't what's best for the kid. And that, I'm sure, makes it much harder.
Well, I wasn't going to bring that up, but you mentioned it. So yeah, so what the state, and whenever I say the state, I mean the actual agency and the judicial system. So they're separate. They don't really, there's no overlapping authority there. Their main goal is reunification, right? And I think a lot of that has to do with how it looks on statistics statewide. I'm sure every state deals with that. Well, we reunified this percentage of kids with parents, and it looks good, like that, right? And so you're right. And and I am all about reunification. Obviously if the kids can go somewhere, safe and their needs are met, right? I grew up poor, like my dad's side of the family, and I told my wife, I was like, they're a little redneck and hillbilly, but there are some good people there. Like, just because you're poor doesn't mean you shouldn't get your kids back. Right. But that is their number one priority, in my opinion. And so keeping that in mind, a lot of times they will make decisions for these kids to go to family members. And literally all you have to do is just like look on Facebook about like these family members, and you can already tell like this is not safe. It's not a good fit. They're, it's either just, you can tell by their lifestyle and their photos, or they're just blatantly, saying stuff about illegal things that they're doing. And, and it's just like, but they'll go there anyway. And it's like, well, it's family, like family's number one. And it's like, yes, I get that. I'm not trying to take anybody's kids from anybody, but if they can't go, to a safe environment, then what should matter the most is what's good for the kid. And of course, they'll say like, oh yeah, of course, the benefit of the child. But realistically, it is about getting them back with their families. The unfortunate thing is in our area, this is probably why it's more prevalent. We have worse reunification statistics here. It's not a very high percentage of kids who get reunified. And so I think that part of that is trying to up that number.
So it's more pressure to...
Right. And and rightfully so. Like, I'm not the state. I don't want to take over child welfare and try to figure it all out. Because, realistically, it needs to start from ground zero again. But that's not where we live. It's not the world we live in. And so our next option is like, what do we do as a church, as a community to try to stand in where we can, sort of thing. Other things that have been just wild have been, another thing you have to contend with besides the state are the parents. And that's really a crapshoot because, you can get, some sweet single mom who's just struggling or has, mental health issues, or you can get some psycho people out there who, are either just blowing up your phone or just, nobody's really ever like threatened us or anything, but, you always kind of have that in the back of your mind. You're like, man, like if my info gets shared or something, they could show up or something.
Well, it's a lot easier with electronics and social media and things nowadays.
Well, the issue is that our information is not very well kept. There's a lot of leaks and people saying the wrong thing to the wrong people, and it's like, oh, great, these people know where I live now. Now, like I said, no one has ever come to our door. Nothing has ever been threatened, anything like that. But it's it's just things that you think about, and then you have to if you do have a parent that's just super angry, uncooperative, because they see you as trying to like take their kid, and it's like, whoa, like I'm trying to give your kid somewhere. Like it's almost as if they think you were part of the decision to remove the kid, and it's like I had nothing to do with state.
Right, like I'm bridging the gap here.
Yeah, this is just a place for your kid to be until they can either go home or have they're adopted. So, yeah, I mean, some of the other hard things too, are dealing with the behaviors. We've had, I mean, the behaviors can be messy and can be dealt with, and they're expected. But, we've had a couple situations where, it like we knew it wasn't going to work out and that they needed to go. But then, the kids themselves have said like, I want to leave, and things like that. And that's happened once. I'll never forget watching her angrily walk out the door with her suitcase, and it's just like, man, I didn't think it was going to ever end like that, after all we tried to pour into this person, and they're just basically like, forget you, have a nice life. And it's like, oh man, like that stuff hurts. But I mean, on the flip side, there's been a lot of really good things.
Well, yeah, that would be the next thing. Like, let's on a positive note, what have been some of the highlights and just things that have happened that were good and ways you've seen God work?
Yeah, I mean, probably the biggest thing is seeing these kids grow, even if they've left our home. Some of them have gone back to their parents, and maybe we didn't agree with that decision, but it's been really neat because, as this is kind of like a ministry, I've never had an issue like sharing the gospel with these kids or trying to speak truth into their lives of like, hey, you do have a voice, and it's because you're made in the image of God. You're created in his image and likeness. You have value and worth. And then hearing, months and sometimes years later, hearing updates on these kids, and they're still talking about God or about how we took them to church. Even if it was for like a weekend or two. I mean, I remember, when we brought Robert to church, it was actually Father's Day, and I was like, oh man, this might be hard for him. Because, his dad wasn't really in his life, but, even just hearing afterward, he was like, wow, like that was really impactful, like I really appreciated that.
Cool.
And sometimes you never know, like if these kids have ever been to church or, what kind of church they've been to, and just being able to, to speak truth into them and that they know how much that they're loved and valued. And so that's probably been the coolest thing, is kind of seeing the fruit of that, even if it's like way later on, or like, hey, like, we still remember doing this, or, hey, we remember Mr. Shawn, or, whoever, having a good time, just getting them to just join normal things, to take them to birthday parties with us, and they get to, experience what that's like, and, going out to eat, and things like this, and a lot of things that they've never done before. It's like, hey, like, have you ever been to this park or done, the trampoline park or something? They're like, no, just seeing them so excited to, experience things for the first time. So, I mean, this one's kind of a both, because like it kind of breaks your heart, but like some of these kids will like start calling you mom or dad. And so it kind of breaks your heart, especially if that, it's not, long term. But then it's also very sweet because like they feel that way about you. And things like that. But yeah, I mean, it's been a road of sanctification, of whiplash, of ups and downs. And basically, we're here to try to shield them from the world. I mean, obviously not completely, but from, their parents, if they need that. And I don't mean like not taking them to visits. I just mean, if their parents are the source of the trauma or abuse, trying to protect them from that. Because we've had that before. Just trying to shield them from all the background stuff that like, kids really shouldn't have to worry or care about. Like what's the court doing? When's our next inspection? Getting a phone call. Oh, hey, we're picking up the kid tomorrow. Then it's like, oh no, sorry, that was a mistake. We're okay. It's just constant like whiplash from that. But yeah, just trying to shield them from just all the crud. And I mean, it's hard. I'm not gonna lie. And one thing I do want to mention though is that through this, there's been a lot of good things people have said and bad. But whenever you get into foster care, it's not just your family that it's going to impact. It's going to impact your extended family. It's going to impact your church family, and people are going to have all types of opinions and things that they want to say and stuff like that. And so it's not easy, but one of the things that drives me crazy is people say like, oh, well, I could never do that, or it takes a special person. And it's like, do you really think like I'm a special person? Like, look at me. Like,
I do think you're special, Scott. I do.
But not like that, like, it's some sort of, like special gift or something you have to have. It's like, no, we're just normal parents trying to make it through and struggling like anybody else. And we just wanted to try to step in the gap for a time and, see if we can help some people. But, it definitely doesn't take a special person to do it. It takes a lot of dedication and hard work. Like you have to stick. Well, I guess commitment is the right word to stick with it and, to be able to burden that stuff. Where people say like, oh, well, I couldn't stand the heartbreak. It would break my heart. And, these are very well-meaning people, but it's like, well, that's great for your heart, but let's compare your heart to everything this little kid has just been through and think about their heart, about all the abuse, all the trauma, all the hospital visits, all the fighting, everything, but you're worried about your heart. And it's like, it's a legitimate thing to say, but if you think that way, I think you're kind of missing the purpose. Like the whole point is to step in the gap and protect their heart. And yeah, sometimes it does break your heart, for sure. And it hurts, and it really does. But, whenever there's brokenness, there's usually growth. And so it's helped me grow, spiritually, I think. It's helped me become more mature in a lot of ways. It's helped me to force patience, and to understand, trauma a lot better too. And and honestly, everything I've learned from foster care, I try to apply it to other parts of my life too, because kids aren't the only ones with trauma and issues. So
I'm glad you shared that stuff at the end, man. It's interesting, the things and comments that people will make, things that they'll say, but yeah, it's a very important part. Like, I just couldn't handle the hurt. Well, now you're saying, you're putting your feelings as priority over this kid's feelings, right? And and I think that's the thing, is that it's not that it takes a special person as though you're like Spider-Man or Thor or something, and you've been endued with some special superpower. I don't have some
spiritual gift, right?
It's either, it really is. It's selflessness, and it's trusting God. A lot of trusting God, knowing who He is, and trusting that He sustains us and what He's called us to do. It's crazy. So already just bringing up us potentially going to Zambia. I've heard that. I hadn't thought about it until you just said it. I've had people say, oh, it takes a special person willing to move to Africa. Yeah. I'm like,
no, it takes an obedient person to move to Africa.
Yeah. I'm like, I'm not special. I didn't want to go.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, all right, Scott, being that you have 3 biological kids, speak to kind of how you still kind of protect them, parent them, in the midst of all of this as you're bringing new kids into the home, and just that dynamic.
Sure. It's honestly, it's been tough, but it's been good. So, we've had just as much heartbreak with our kids as we have like ourselves. So, every time like a kid has left, especially like my oldest daughter, she's like come to us, obviously like crying and in tears, and been like, why are we putting in all this work and we still have to say goodbye, sort of thing. So I think bringing your kids into the conversation it's been helpful for us, because even though they're 11 and younger, like I can't sit there and tell a foster kid like, oh, hey, you have a voice, but my biological kids, like, I'll be quiet, we're just going to make decisions. Because honestly, that's one of the dangers. You'll hear that from adult kids who, their parents fostered, and sometimes they'll say stuff like that. Like, I understand why you did it. It was a good thing, but I wish you wouldn't have, because sometimes the biological kids, it's like, well, your needs are met. You're fine. Like, I have to deal with these other kids.
They can almost feel forgotten.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So, protecting them from that is a huge part of it, because you have to consider the effect on your whole family, or else it's just really not worth it, So there's been a lot of heartbreak. But, speaking of my daughter saying that, she has said things like that, and then we'll sit down and have a conversation with them and be like, well, hey, like, do you guys still want us to foster? And they're like, yeah, definitely, like, we love it, like, let's keep doing it. So there's that, whole beauty and ashes thing again, right? Like there can be a lot of heartbreak. And I mean, and honestly, that's a great point to people who say like, oh, well, my heart couldn't take it. Well, my 7-year-old daughter's heart, got broken too, but she still wants to do it. And I'm not saying that at a certain point your heart can't take it, because honestly, I'm kind of at that point, where it's just, it's worn me out a little bit. Like I'm kind of ready to move into a different chapter. Like I would like to adopt and then kind of move more into like a mentor, type role, or help out in another way. And that's a whole other thing too, is, not everybody is called to do this, but like as our church body has shown us, you guys have been our community. You guys have met our needs and, brought us food and helped us with all types of stuff, furniture and moving beds and doing all sorts of things. Like there are a million ways to help support. But I guess like getting back to my kids, intentionally making the time to still have one-on-one time with them, to still, meet their needs too. Even if it's for 5 or 15 minutes a day. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, I spend a certain amount of time with each kid every day, but just making sure that you have moments to connect them, with the family too, just so they don't feel forgotten and things like that. And you know what, you kind of have to let them figure out how emotionally attached they want to get or not. Some of my kids get really attached and very heartbroken, and some of my kids, they, I don't know if they've kind of just built up like a wall about it. I mean, like they're always super friendly and, they interact with the kids and, treat them just the same. But whenever they leave, they're kind of okay with it. They just kind of, they know that that's what happens a lot of times. So.
Thanks, man. Appreciate you sharing that. Shawn, any other questions, man, for Scott?
I guess just final thoughts. Anybody maybe listening to this that is interested in foster care, anybody that's maybe been thinking about it or whatever, would you have any words of encouragement or any warnings towards someone looking towards that?
No, I'm sitting here laughing. I just wanted to be like, no, don't. No, I'm kidding. Yeah. So I think one of the biggest things that we weren't disciplined enough in was sticking to our boundaries, because what happens is, and rightfully so, whether you're doing foster care as a single parent, or with your husband or wife, is to come up with some boundaries. And so, at first it kind of sounded odd, because it was like, well, I don't want to be like super picky. But realistically, I'm just talking about like how many you're willing to take into your home and what ages. I mean, there are other boundaries you can consider, if you'll take medical needs or, things like that, or, severe behaviors. But what happened was we set our boundaries, and then you get the phone call or you see the kid in person, and then that kind of blows everything up, because it's a real person. And
it's a human being standing in front of you with a need.
Right. Like at your door or a phone call away, or, like, oh, hey, there's this, 3-year-old sleeping at the office who has cigarette burns on his face. And, it just breaks your heart. And you're like, well, let's pray about it and let's do this. And I mean, we haven't ever just like jumped without praying about it, but I would probably say stick to your boundaries and, obviously educate yourself. But, some of the biggest help we've had is actually from you guys. Is having a community. So like my wife and I, we're part of a foster care support group that meets once a month. And, when we first started this, we didn't really know a lot of other foster parents, but just getting to know other people who are doing this too is probably the biggest help, because not only is there, different perspectives and wisdom and things like that, but, somebody has probably dealt with or is, going through the same thing that you are. And I mean, and that can even help with the court systems. It can help with, dealing with the state and things like that, knowing how to navigate, who to contact if there's an issue, and things like that. But really sticking to your boundaries is probably the biggest thing I can say. Because, once that kid's in your home, it's really hard to tell them like, hey, you've got to go, this isn't working out, so once they're in your home, you have to be willing to accept, everything that, comes with that kid. And, I'd probably say there's like a progression, because, a lot of these kids have siblings. And so, you'll be asked, if you're willing to, take in brothers and sisters, because another thing, and I totally agree with this, from the state's perspective, is they try to keep siblings together as much as possible. totally 100% agree with that, but make sure to ask, because they could have 4 or 5 brothers and sisters. Or the state may not be willing to let you have them in your home if you don't take the siblings and things like that. Asking questions about behaviors, asking questions about medical stuff, and a lot of times they're not going to know, because that kid's just as new to them as anybody else. So just keep in mind that the information may not always be accurate about the kid. Obviously, there's no perfect kids that are ever going to come into your home without anything. So just be prepared, have an open mind, try to meet their needs. Even the first couple of days, nights, making sure they're comfortable, they have the food that they like, they're comfortable where they're sleeping, and just kind of try to get to know them, feel them out. What type of person are they? What's their currency? What actually motivates them to, interact? Sometimes it's food, sometimes it's video games, sometimes it's whatever. They'll usually let like what they like and don't like and stuff like that. So, but if you go outside your boundaries, just be prepared. You may not be ready for that. Especially sometimes, you could have multiple kids in your homes and they each have separate cases, and that's like foster care advanced class. Like if you're just starting out, just try to stick with like one case, because you don't want to deal with 2 different court systems and lawyers and social workers and all those people in your house and visits and things like that. And don't be afraid to stand up for yourself and ask questions, because I think a lot of people assume that they can't, stand up to the system or fight for these kids. And we have learned that you absolutely can. Yes, sometimes we've gotten in trouble for that, for skipping the chain of command and going up a little bit too high. But you know what? It's part of our job to fight for these kids. And that means, making phone calls, kicking in doors to make sure that they're getting, medical needs or daycare or whatever it is, that they get what they need. So don't ever be afraid to ask questions or push people for what's good for the kid.
Scott, man, thank you for opening up today, man.
Yeah.
And bearing your soul on what can be a very difficult topic, I think, and something, not everybody knows about or even thinks about regularly. And we're thankful for you and Shara and your kids and the ministry that you've had, the way you've been able to plant seeds and pour into kids. And as far as the adoption thing, man, we're all in prayer with you about that, and excited to see what God does for you next and what this next kind of venture looks like for you.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And I'll just kind of close with this, I guess. It's like, I wanted to be fair to the topic, and I know that there's been a lot of like ups and downs in what I've said, and I'm not trying to scare anybody away. There's been a lot of fruit that's come from several different sides, not only the kids who have been in our home, but our family as well, how it's grown us. So it's not just, oh, hey, we're thinking about jumping into this, but hey, this guy said we're going to get our hearts broken. Like, yeah, you might, but you know what? Like, God will do things that you never thought he would do in your life, and how he can change you, mature you, and change your perspective of the world, because like you said, a lot of people just don't know, the need that's out there. So,
I mean, I'm glad you shared all that you shared, because I think about Jesus when he spoke about being a disciple, right? And, you must leave father and mother, or follow me unto death, right? You must, be willing to forsake all to follow me. And it said that everybody turned and walked away. It is a good thing to count the cost. And even in something like this, it is a good thing to have someone like you who shares the good times and the hard times. Somebody shouldn't enter this in just thinking that it's all roses and I'm going to sign up to be a foster parent and save the world and everything's going to be great. Like it's going to be some Hallmark movie. There are hard times, and it's okay to talk about that, so I appreciate your openness, man.
Yeah. Thanks for asking me about it.
Yeah, man.
A lot of feelings and emotions that go into foster care.
No doubt.
All the feelings.
All of them. Yes. All right. Well, thank you for listening. We are dropping new episodes every Monday. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss an episode. You can also connect with us on social media. You can check us out on Twitter at deed_truth or on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube by searching Deed and Truth Podcast, or you can check out the website deedandtruthpodcast.com. All right, until next time.